The tale of the 47 Rōnin is one of the most celebrated, one of the most adapted, and frankly one of the most internationally recognizable samurai stories of all time. Based on a real historic event known as the Akō Jiken or the Akō Incident, the story typically goes something like this. A young samurai lord is subjected to relentless provocation and humiliation by a senior court official. Eventually, pushed beyond his limits, the young lord draws his sword and strikes the official, an act of defiance meant to defend his samurai honor. The official, however, survives, while the young lord is sentenced to death for attacking a fellow nobleman within the shogun's palace, his death leaving behind 47 loyal retainers, now masterless samurai, or Rōnin. Seeking justice for the disgraced lord, the Rōnin secretly plan a bold and carefully orchestrated night raid set to take place right in the heart of Edo, the peaceful capital of Japan and the home of the country's richest and most powerful individuals. Their target, however, was of course none other than the dishonorable court official whom they hold responsible for their own lord's tragic fate. And on a snowy winter night in January of 1703, their plan succeeds. Driven by unwavering loyalty, they kill the official and avenge their lord. But justice comes at a cost. The shogun, the ruler of Japan, upholds the law and orders all 47 Rōnin to commit seppuku, a sacrifice which, though grim, is seen as the ultimate display of the samurai virtues: loyalty, courage, righteousness, and honor. Ideals that, by the 18th century, must have felt like relics of a fading age. This tale, it's got pretty much everything you want from a classic samurai story, doesn't it? Drama, betrayal, violence, a noble hero, a corrupt villain, and of course, some good old revenge to top things off. The thing is, some parts of this tale are either untrue or greatly misconstrued in order to fit a certain narrative, because the real Akō Incident was actually far messier. There was no clear villain, no unambiguous heroism. The act of vengeance itself cost not only a court official his life, but also more than a dozen completely uninvolved people theirs. Still, the romanticized version endures. For over 300 years, this tale has inspired countless plays, books, and films. Some great, others less so. Still, all things considered, the tale of the 47 Rōnin, it's a really good story. Perhaps too good, because it's been told and retold so many times that eventually some people started to accept the fictional story as being completely historically accurate, ignoring the fact that there are numerous, oftentimes rather significant discrepancies with what actually happened. And so, that is exactly what I want to explore together with you today. What actually happened during the Akō Incident? How was the feud between Asano and Kira born in the first place? Who was truly at fault? And how did Asano's followers pull off what is both in fiction as well as in reality one of the most ambitious and one of the most meticulously planned assassination plots in samurai history? Let us take a deep dive into the true story behind Japan's greatest vendetta. This is the story of the 47 Rōnin. The backdrop for today's story is of course the prosperous Edo period, or more specifically, the Genroku Era, lasting from 1688 to 1704. The end of this era marked a full century since the mighty Tokugawa shogunate had taken control of Japan, and by this point, the foundations of Tokugawa rule were already firmly in place. Beyond the rise of arts and entertainment that defined the period, the Tokugawa government had also perfected its method of governing, carefully maintaining peace in a unified Japan while securing the Tokugawa family's grip on power. Easier said than done, of course. The powerful samurai clans and the warlords that had dominated the landscape before the Tokugawa rise didn't just vanish overnight. And not all of them were thrilled to now bow to a centralized government either. So, keeping these regional lords, known as daimyo or literally great names, in check was a monumental task. Preventing them from launching wars against each other or rebelling against the shogunate required a complex system of control, which included thoughtfully planned out land redistributions, strict regulations, and the infamous sankin kotai, or alternate attendance system. This was essentially a form of systematic hostage-taking, which required the daimyo to spend alternating years in Edo, away from their home provinces and families. The intricacies of Tokugawa governance are perhaps best saved for another video. But suffice it to say, the Tokugawa clan's 250-year reign as the undisputed rulers of Japan speaks volumes about how effective and deeply calculated it all was. And that is also part of the reason as to why the Akō Incident was so extraordinary. What the 47 Rōnin did was an open act of defiance in an age where defiance simply wasn't really a thing. And to make matters even more scandalous, it all began within Edo Castle, the seat of Tokugawa power, the stronghold of the shogunate, and the very home of the ruling shogun himself. And on top of all that, one half of the coin that would spark this legendary drama was none other than one of those aforementioned daimyo who were supposedly under the shogunate's tight control. Enter Asano Naganori. Born in 1667, Naganori came from the prestigious Asano clan and was the great-grandson of Asano Nagamasa, a somewhat notable figure during Japan's unification. Nagamasa had supported the Toyotomi clan in battle, and was even related to its leader Toyotomi Hideyoshi, one of Japan's three great unifiers. As a reward for his and his family's efforts, the Asano clan was granted domains in Wakayama, Hiroshima, and Akō. And it was the latter, Akō, a castle town in Harima province, that the star of our story, Asano Naganori, would inherit 3/4 of a century later, becoming the daimyo of Akō in 1675, at the young age of 8. To be frank, little is known about Naganori's personal life. Our only real insight comes from a Tokugawa government report from the year 1690 titled Dokai Koshuki, a kind of behavioral survey of 243 different daimyo from across Japan. Unfortunately, the portrait it paints of the 23-year-old Asano is far from flattering. In the document, he's described as being intelligent and strict, but also as lacking in both military and literary skills. He reportedly preferred indulging in pleasure over fulfilling his duties as a daimyo, and his sexual appetite was noted as being extraordinary. The report claimed that his retainers were pretty much rewarded based on their success at procuring women for him. And yes, these were the very same retainers who would later be hailed as the 47 Rōnin. You know, the paragons of loyalty and samurai honor. With this being the only contemporary account we have of Asano's character, the heroic image of a noble warrior tragically defending his honor starts to crumble a little bit. And if we now shift focus to his adversary, the supposed villain of the tale of the 47 Rōnin, and the man who allegedly provoked this whole saga, well, let's just say, it seems like he might not have been much of a villain either. Born in 1641, Kira Yoshihisa was 26 years older than Asano Naganori. But just like Asano, Kira also came from a highly respected, well-connected family. In fact, his lineage could be traced, albeit very distantly, back to none other than Minamoto no Yoritomo, Japan's very first shogun. However, despite the diluted shogun blood running through his veins, Kira wasn't a daimyo. Instead, he held the rank of hatamoto, or bannerman, a respectable and prestigious title that, by the early 1700s, had shifted from a military designation to more of a bureaucratic one. But while technically, Kira Yoshihisa was below the rank of a daimyo, the man was not to be underestimated. As the member of a so-called koke, or high family, he held a hereditary, very important position as the shogunal master of ceremonies. And although his official income was also less than half the minimum required to qualify as a daimyo, he also didn't have the stress and the costly burden of managing any land. His entire stipend paid by the shogunate was more or less his to spend, and with his own mansion in Edo, it's fair to say that his life was at least as luxurious as that of a daimyo. So, the year is 1701. And Kira Yoshihisa, now 60 years old, had been earning his paycheck by doing these shogunal rituals for around 40 years. The man was experienced, to say the least, and it was assumed that the upcoming ceremony, one of the most important of the entire year, would go off without a hitch under his guidance. The ceremony in question was part of a highly ritualized exchange. Every new year, the ruling shogun would send an envoy to Kyoto to offer his formal greetings to the emperor. In return, the emperor would dispatch his own imperial representatives back to Edo, and it was Kira's job to oversee the inevitable farewell ceremony, a moment of intense formality and ritualized gift-giving as the imperial convoy departed Edo to return to Kyoto. In 1701, this farewell ritual was scheduled to take place on April the 17th, and 2 lucky daimyo were selected to serve as hosts of the event. It was a most prestigious honor, and one of the 2 daimyo who received this honor that year, who else but Asano Naganori, the now 34-year-old lord of Akō. It would be Kira Yoshihisa's responsibility to train and prepare Asano for this highly significant event. An event where precision, ritual, and attention to the smallest of details were of utmost importance. And it is somewhere in the midst of these preparations, between the strict, meticulous veteran master of ceremony and the young, headstrong lord of Akō, that things started to go wrong. The events that follow are known to us these days thanks to a reliable eyewitness account by Kachikawa Yoriteru, a high-ranking guard at Edo Castle who was set to serve as an intermediary in that day's gift exchange ceremony. Kachikawa had been informed that the ceremony was to be held earlier than originally scheduled and sought to confirm this with Kira Yoshihisa, just to make sure. The 2 men were mid-conversation when suddenly, out of nowhere, Asano Naganori appeared, walked up behind Kira, and struck him with the blade of his wakizashi, the shorter of the 2 swords carried by a samurai. Shouting the phrase, "Have you forgotten about my recent grievance?" Asano made a second strike, aiming at Kira once more before being restrained by Kachikawa and quickly arrested by the castle guards. All the while, he kept repeating the same thing, that he had a grievance against Kira and had no choice but to act. So, what was this mysterious grievance Asano kept shouting about? Well, that frustratingly remains the single biggest unanswered question of this entire incident. We will never know, because Asano was never given the chance to explain himself in court. In fact, he was dead within a matter of hours after the attack took place. While the ceremony continued as planned, with no one in attendance even aware of what had happened, the young lord was placed under house arrest in a nearby mansion of a fellow daimyo, and it was during this house arrest that he issued what would become his final recorded statement, a verbal message written down and delivered to his retainers, an apology for what had happened earlier that day. But once again, it contained no explanation whatsoever of that mysterious grievance that had driven him to violence in the first place. That message was recorded sometime shortly after 1 PM. By 4 PM, the order for Asano's execution was issued, and by 6 PM, he had taken his own life through seppuku. So, again, what could possibly have driven a man like Asano Naganori to lash out like that inside the shogun's own residence, knowing full well that the consequences could lead to his own death? Well, until someone finally invents a goddamn time machine, we're left with nothing but speculation. And speculate historians have for over 300 years. The most common theory, that Kira Yoshihisa must have said or done something so unbearably insulting during the ceremony preparations that Asano finally snapped. And I don't doubt it. It's entirely possible that Kira was being a complete jerk to a young lord who, despite what the 1690 government report claimed about his character, might not have deserved it. On the other hand, what could Kira possibly have said to justify drawing a blade on a government official? Inside the shogun's own castle, no less. Asano had to know what the consequences would be. I guess you're starting to see why I said earlier that this story doesn't have a clear-cut hero or villain. But regardless of whether you see Asano as a righteous victim or an impulsive aggressor, one thing is for certain. The man was dead, pushing up daisies, shuffled off his mortal coil, ordered to take his own life in classic ritual fashion. But as sudden and arguably even unjust as his death may have been, it was only the beginning, because what was about to follow was a nearly 2-year-long series of events leading up to what would go down as the most legendary revenge story in samurai history. But here's the thing. The decision to take revenge against Kira Yoshihisa, and by extension to rebel against the shogun's judgment as well, was not a given from the start. Asano Naganori's final message reached his retainers quickly, both those back home in Akō and those who had been with him in Edo. And naturally, his followers were absolutely outraged by their young lord's tragic fate. Still, for the most part, their initial reaction wasn't necessarily a desire for revenge. It was fear. They were concerned about what might happen to their branch of the Asano clan as a whole, and their worries were certainly justified. Just as swiftly as he punished their lord, the shogun stripped the clan of everything. 2 government officials were dispatched to confiscate the Akō domain and its castle, while Asano's younger brother and rightful heir, Nagahiro, was placed under house arrest in the capital. Now, combine that with the fact that many of Asano's retainers believed their lord had been treated unfairly, and the idea of revenge naturally started to take root. But adding even more fuel to the fire was the fact that Kira Yoshihisa walked away completely unscathed, a highly unusual outcome. In most cases like this, both parties were punished regardless of who started the fight. But in the eyes of the shogunate, Asano was a coward and an aggressor, while Kira was seen as the innocent victim. True or not, this uneven outcome only deepened the resentment within the Asano camp. Yet still, a revenge plot wasn't such a simple decision. After all, it meant defying the shogun himself, and such defiance would undoubtedly come at a high cost. And so, the Asano retainers took their time to deliberate, weighing their loyalty, their futures, and the potential risks. And naturally, not all of them agreed on what to do. In total, Asano's death and the loss of the domain left 270 retainers behind, not just the famous 47. All of them split between Akō and Edo, and opinions on what to do next varied wildly. Some wanted to barricade themselves inside Akō Castle and make a final stand. Some proposed committing mass seppuku at the family temple in protest. Others still held out hope that the clan might be restored, hoping that the shogun might reconsider, allowing the young Asano Nagahiro, the rightful heir, to reclaim his birthright. This specific situation hung in the balance for about a year, until finally a final decision came. Asano Nagahiro was released from house arrest and sent to stay with a different branch of the Asano family in Hiroshima. Just like that, the Akō domain was lost, the hope of restoration dead, the retainers transformed into Rōnin, masterless samurai. And so, 47 of them finally made their choice. It was time for revenge. Now, planning such a vendetta was not going to be a walk in the park, because Kira Yoshihisa, he wasn't stupid. He knew retaliation was a possibility and was on high alert. And while Kira wasn't a daimyo and didn't control a domain, that also meant he lived in the heart of Edo, where he was surrounded by layers of protection. His mansion was guarded by a private military retinue, and Edo itself was under constant surveillance. You could argue he was safer than many daimyo outside the capital. Plus, Kira had powerful allies, like his wife's family, the Uesugi clan, who had influence, resources, and ears everywhere. So, in order to get to Kira, the Rōnin would need two things: meticulous planning and absolute secrecy. We don't know every detail of how they pulled it off exactly, but we do know this much. The 47 Rōnin began quietly relocating to Edo in late 1702, roughly 2 months before the attack was gonna take place. They arrived at different times to avoid suspicion, spread across the city, and set up safe houses, places to plan in secret and avoid suspicion from both the shogunate and Kira's informants. According to legend, they also went to extreme lengths to appear as if they'd given up on samurai life, pretending to be drunkards, laying low, divorcing their wives, leaving their children behind, all to maintain the illusion that they were no longer a threat. Somehow, they even got their hands on the blueprints to Kira's mansion, which again, according to legends, were acquired by one of the Rōnin who married the daughter of the man who designed the mansion, which, if true, is both insanely risky and incredibly clever. And after some careful planning, everything was now in place. The night of the raid was chosen carefully, January 31st, 1703. And I am happy to report that just like in all the dramatized versions, it was a quiet, cold, and snowy night in Edo. It must have been a strangely beautiful scene for what was to be a bloody vendetta right in the heart of the Japanese capital. That night, the Rōnin came armed not just with weapons, but with a tactical plan tailor-made for the mansion's exact layout. They knew where the guards would be, how the walls were structured, and how to move fast. As for the 47 themselves, they were a diverse group, ranging in age from 15 to 76 years old. Their leader was Oishi Kuranosuke, the clan's karo or chief retainer, and on the other end of the spectrum in terms of rank was Terasaka Kichiemon, a low-ranking ashigaru or foot soldier. Altogether, the Rōnin were about to be outnumbered 2-1 by the guards inside the mansion, not even counting any outside help that might arrive if the alarm was to be raised. A monumental task to overcome, and so their only hope was speed, precision, and an element of surprise. As the raid on the Kira mansion began, the 47 Rōnin split into two groups, each heading to their assigned position, one at the front gate, the other at the back. Somewhere around this time, the lowest ranking of them all, Terasaka Kichiemon, quietly left the area. Why exactly he departed is still debated to this day. Some believe he lost his nerve and fled in fear, while most argue he was actually assigned a critical task: delivering word of the raid's commencement to the Asano family. But whatever the case, although Terasaka had been involved in the planning, he played no part in the actual attack itself, leaving a total of 46 Rōnin to carry out the mission. At the front gate, 4 of the men used ladders to scale the outer wall and climb down into the courtyard. Their first stop was the gatehouse, where a lone guard lay fast asleep just like the rest of the Kira household. The Rōnin woke him and demanded the key for the gate, but the guard explained that it was inside the mansion, and since there wasn't any time to go and search for it, the Rōnin opted for a quicker, if less elegant, solution: smashing the lock open with a mallet, allowing the rest of the team to pour in through the now open gates, and a similar breach was made on the other side of the property at the rear entrance. Then, as most of the Rōnin filled the mansion's courtyard, some of the men rushed off to the surrounding properties to calm down the neighbors, assuring them that what they were hearing was a vendetta against Kira Yoshihisa. Nothing to be afraid of. Now, just in case someone did decide to sound the alarm though, archers armed with bows and arrows were already stationed along the walls. Their job was to intercept any fleeing members of the Kira household, or anyone else who might try to raise the alarm. Meanwhile, another group headed towards the barracks, where Kira's soldiers were housed. If alerted, those men could derail the entire mission. But to prevent such a thing from happening, the Rōnin hammered iron clamps into the doors of the barracks, sealing them shut. With the soldiers contained, the only resistance came from Kira's family and his retainers inside the mansion, which the Rōnin had now surrounded from both sides. Then Oishi Kuranosuke, the leader of the group, beat his drum. It was the signal to begin the final phase of the raid, entering the mansion and searching for Kira Yoshihisa. For the first time that night, the Rōnin were met with actual resistance upon entering the building, as a few samurai retainers, 3 young servants, and even Kira's own son attempted, and bravely I might add, to defend their master. But sadly, they stood little chance against what was a well-organized, well-armed assault by the Rōnin. In total, 17 members of the household were killed in the chaos that night, many of them unarmed and newly awoken from sleep only to face a real-life nightmare. Some of them tried to flee or seek help from the nearby residence of the allied Uesugi family, but most were cut down by the attackers or shot by the marksmen posted around the property. All in all, only 4 managed to escape. As the battle raged on, the Rōnin spread throughout the mansion, searching room to room. They were certain that Kira was there, as his bedding was still warm. Still, he was nowhere to be found. But then, someone noticed a small storehouse in the courtyard used to store charcoal, and as the Rōnin approached, 2 of Kira's men appeared, ready to defend it. They, too, were quickly defeated, leaving the door open for the Rōnin, who entered the storehouse. And sure enough, inside the storehouse was an old man hiding in the shadows, prompting the Rōnin to blow their bamboo whistles, which was a signal that the target had been found. Oishi arrived, and held a lantern up to the man's face. It was him. Kira Yoshihisa, likely fully aware that he was already drawing his final couple of breaths. Now, we don't actually know if any words were exchanged at this point, but shortly after confirming his identity, the Rōnin carried out their long-awaited revenge. They beheaded Kira on the spot, and with that, the revenge mission's main goal had been accomplished. 2 of the Rōnin then immediately departed to report the incident to the shogunate's chief inspector. Although certain kinds of vendettas were technically permitted under Tokugawa law, what the Rōnin did was still considered a serious crime. The Rōnin, they knew this going in, of course, and had no intention of running away or begging for leniency. Now, whether or not the assassination of Kira was justified is of course up for debate. Especially since so many innocent lives were lost. It is difficult to view the Rōnin as purely noble. But on the other hand, at least they were also ready to take responsibility for their brutal actions. Now, before they surrendered to the authorities though, there was still one very important final task to complete. It was around 3 AM when the remaining 44 Rōnin, they hadn't sustained even a single casualty, set off on a long march through the cold winter night. Their destination, Sengakuji, the Asano family temple nearly 10 kilometers away. Carefully avoiding the territories of the Uesugi clan and other allies of Kira, the Rōnin made their way through the streets of Edo carrying Kira's head with them, until finally they arrived at Sengakuji, where they washed the severed head, then placed it before the grave of their fallen lord, Asano Naganori. There, they knelt in silence and offered incense, therefore completing what they believed was a flawless act of vengeance, perfectly encapsulated in a written statement, which was to be their last. Quote, "We who have eaten of your food could not without blushing repeat the verse, 'Thou shalt not live under the same heaven nor tread the same earth with the enemy of your father, O Lord. Nor could we have dared to leave hell and present ourselves before you in paradise, unless we had carried out the vengeance which you began.'" End quote. The mission of the 47 Rōnin was finished, and they were ready to face the consequences head-on. Or, well, 46 of them were. Terasaki Kichimon, you know, that guy who left early for one reason or another. He managed to avoid arrest and, perhaps due to his role as a simple messenger, was ultimately pardoned by the shogun. He went on to live to the impressive age of 87. His comrades, on the other hand, they weren't so lucky. The other 46 Rōnin were divided into groups and then placed under the custody of various daimyo, where they awaited their fate. And they had to wait for a while actually, because although the shogun had acted so incredibly swiftly when it came to punishing Asano Naganori close to 2 years earlier, this time he hesitated. Immediately after the actual raid took place, the story of the 47 Rōnin started to be retold like a fantastic samurai tale. A tale of honor and undying loyalty. And so, large parts of the public had quickly become enamored with Asano's avengers. Punishing them too harshly and too quickly might very well have risked upsetting public sentiment. And so, the shogun thought long and hard about his decision. More than 1.5 months passed before he finally reached a verdict, but on March 20th, 1703, the sentence was finally issued. It was, of course, death for every single one of the 46 Rōnin, but not by execution. The Rōnin were granted the honor of dying as samurai by their own hands, and so all 46 of them ended up committing seppuku one by one. Just like that, 46 of the legendary 47 Rōnin were no more. But of course, it was in death that these avengers of Asano Naganori would begin their transformation from the talk of the town to immortal samurai folk heroes. Initially, the story started spreading the old-fashioned way, word of mouth. It's quite easy to imagine how the people of Edo became so captivated by the tale in the first place. I mean, some of them may have seen it with their own eyes, the moment when 46 exhausted, blood-stained samurai marched through the freezing night towards Sengakuji Temple carrying the severed head of Hatamoto. Others might have witnessed the dramatic arrests that followed, as the Rōnin were escorted to their places of confinement. Either way, opinions began to form immediately, and not all of them favorable. From the very beginning, some questioned just how samurai-like their actions actually were. After all, they hadn't challenged Kira Yoshihisa in a formal duel or whatever. Instead, they used deception and timing to catch him by surprise, attacking him in his own home and killing not only him but 17 other innocent people in the process. I mean, sure, it was a really well planned out attack. But among some samurai idealists especially, that might look less like an honorable act of a warrior and more like a cold-blooded assassination. Cowardly, even. But on the other side, there were those who were completely swept up by the Rōnin's story, or at least by what it represented. These men had upheld their duty to their fallen lord even when it meant certain death. That kind of selfless loyalty evoked the romantic image of a lost age of warriors, an idealized samurai spirit that by the early 1700s, a full century into Tokugawa rule, must have felt like somewhat of a relic from the past. Stories like this one stirred nostalgia for a more turbulent, but in the eyes of some, a more honorable period in Japanese history. And the more the story was told and retold, the more it leaned into that romanticism. You know, even if it meant twisting or even erasing a few inconvenient facts along the way. That transformation from real brutal vendetta to beloved national legend began almost immediately after the raid. Less than 2 weeks after the attack on Kira's mansion, Edo's Nakamura Theater had already staged a full play that is now believed to have been loosely based on the event. It didn't last long, as the shogunate shut it down after just a few days. But it was only the beginning of something much greater. Following several failed attempts to dramatize the tale in a way that could pass the shogunate's censorship, playwright Chikamatsu Monsaemon finally cracked the code in 1710, 7 years after the raid. By then, 2 key developments had changed the climate. Tokugawa Tsunayoshi, the ruling shogun during the entire Akō Incident, who had ordered the deaths of Asano Naganori and later that of the 46 Rōnin, had died a year prior. Then, not long after, Asano Naganori's younger brother and rightful heir, Nagahiro, received an official pardon. He certainly got the timing right, but Chikamatsu's real success lay in how he cleverly disguised his play. He said his version of the story in the world of the 14th century Civil War chronicle, the Taiheki, swapped out some real names and avoided any direct mention of recent history. It worked. His play not only dodged government censorship, it became a hit, a blueprint, a foundation for countless future adaptations of the Akō Incident, each one further shaping the myth of the 47 Rōnin into a timeless samurai drama, a process that still continues to this day. The tale of the 47 Rōnin, the greatest vendetta in samurai history, has endured across centuries, generations, and storytelling mediums. From stage to screen, the legend lives on. And while most adaptations tend to take some pretty significant creative liberties, sometimes bending or even discarding the historical truth, they remain compelling because the themes at its core simply never lose their power. Revenge, loyalty, sacrifice, honor. These are the stories people return to again and again, especially when they come with clashing swords and stoic warriors. And Keanu Reeves, I guess. But the real story still stands apart in its own unique sort of way. As a tale without clear heroes or villains, one where the honorable final act of the Rōnin might not have been quite so honorable after all. And maybe that is why it continues to fascinate, not because it's simple, but because it isn't. Because it asks questions that do not have easy answers. And of course because even now, more than 300 years later, we are still talking about it. And that was the story of the 47 Rōnin. Was their revenge justified? What was it that Kira said to make Asano snap? As long as it's PG-13, feel free to share your own theories in the comments down below. And since this was a story about undying loyalty, I guess it's only right that I extend my gratitude to my loyal Patreon supporters, which there are not quite 47 of as of yet, including Bobby Wu, Rōnin, The Hockey Gentleman, Javier Soravia, Capybara Chuck, Turam, Daniel Dees, RK0, Sierra DC, White Gilden, Justin Down, Yoko the Space Whale, Steve Matsui, Cats and Soup, Chart B-Man, Ben Herodine, Metal Mama, T-Bird, and Tom Ericus Prime. And hey, no matter who you are, if you still haven't turned off the video yet, then thank you so much for watching. Sayonara.